This demonstration has got a little bit of everything. Building, boats, beach, sea, sun. This is Cadaques in Spain, and my name is Tim Wilmot, watercolor painter and tutor and creating YouTube videos up here. This, as I say, this is Cadaques, a photograph I took on an EPC art course back in probably 2012 or thereabouts. But a lovely spot near Girona in the, I think it's the Catalonian area of Spain on the Mediterranean coast, but very pretty. Well, it's like a large village, small town, and lots of little tiny inlets and tiny bays with these very pretty local boats beached up on shore. So in this demonstration, I'm going to go through the complete process with you from start to finish, just talk about the source of my painting, what was the inspiration behind it, what's going to be my process for approaching this watercolor painting, and I'll go through all the various stages of the painting, from the initial drawing and doing a wash. We'll cover different watercolor techniques, and I'll give plenty of commentary along the way. For my Patreon friends, this video is released early and on the Patreon platform for my Patreon friends, so that they're going to get to see it early, and also ad free as well. No offending adverts. Sorry if adverts come up for those non-Patreon people. It's just a little bit of compensation for my efforts to create these videos for you. So go to patreon.com, and also I will be sharing for my Patreon friends, I'll be sharing a high resolution image of the source photo, this photo, and also my end painting. More on that towards the end. And also up on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/Tim Wilmot, and you'll see loads of things up there that exclusives for Patreon people. So back to this watercolor demonstration, Cadaques. It's got a bit of everything for watercolor. We're almost contre-jour. I think the sun's coming slightly from the top right, up here somewhere. And it's the afternoon. It's a day in September, I think. Or was it early in the year? I can't remember now. But it's got a bit of everything. Background there, the other side of the bay. We can just about see some buildings, boats in the bay, very simple shapes. And look at the value, try and think about the values of the background. And then to the middle ground, we've got this building in the shade, this shady wall here, casting a little bit of shade again against the harbour wall. And then to the foreground, these boats, looking at the angle of those boats, the shoreline, the edges that we've got here as well, lots of hard edges on these shadows, the edges of those shadows. A range of values, lots of light hitting the gunnels of these boats and the seats inside those boats. We've got a bit of rigging here wrapped around the, what would that be? Is that the stern or the bow? It's probably the bow, I would have thought. They're pushed down out to sea. Yeah, so a little bit of everything. Lots of watercolor techniques I'm going to be covering as well. Let's see how we get on. Paper I'm using for this demo for this painting is Saunders Waterford. It's cold press, surface texture, so medium roughness, and 300 grams in weight, 140 pounds. It's 15 inches across by 11 inches down. So this is quarter imperial size, which is my favoured size, almost like a 4:3 aspect ratio, and the paper's gummed down, taped down with some masking tape. So the first step for me is an outline drawing as per normal, and I normally start in two places. It could be me being right-handed. Sometimes I like to work from top left to bottom right, so gradually going over the paper. Other times I may start with a focal point. In this case, this one of these beautiful boats, these small boats on the beach. So trying to get that right for the composition, balance those boats. I don't want those boats to be, for me, to be too low in the composition so that all the detail would be in the bottom. I want to get a little bit of the beach. From the source photo, I'm ignoring the big boat in the bottom right corner and just getting in really these three main boats, and then there are over to the left in the middle there are some smaller craft just sort of lying up against each other. I'll keep that fairly loose. So these three boats, I need to be paying careful attention to the shape of the tops of the boats, the gunnels. That is imperative, trying to make them look fairly symmetrical as well, not lopsided, which is an easy thing to do with small boats like this. And looking slightly down on top of them, where I took the photograph, there's a little promenade about a foot or two above the level of the beach. So you're looking a little bit down on top of these boats. So a bit of a tricky angle to draw them. So the far side of the beach, there's a road snaking its way around the building, a bit of a curve around the building. This is the building here. Get the top edge, not too much to it, bit of a balcony. And then the far bay, top of the hills in the background, shoreline, water's edge on the far side of the bay, maybe some simple shapes for the boats, basically little rectangles, thin rectangles, different sizes. And as I normally do, I will include a couple of figures. So first one here, I'll keep them fairly simple. They're because we're contre-jour, we're looking against the light, then they're going to be simple silhouetted shapes. And a second figure here. Maybe just a slightly different pose to that one compared to the first one. And another little tip, if you find it difficult to draw in legs, with legs I tend to keep them fairly loose, but if you did have some difficulty painting legs, then hide them have the boat in front of them. A lot easier. Right, just a few more details for the building. As well as Patreon, I do regular online workshops which are run separate to Patreon, and so they're open to anyone, painters of all levels. Just go to these demonstrations are run on the Crowdcast platform, so just go up to crowdcast.io/Tim Wilmot, TIMWILMOT, and you'll see all the details of up-and-coming workshops, and also take part in previous workshops and get a critique from me. So, drawing done, painting now. I normally always start with the sky, and we'll have a few little gentle fair weather clouds in the sky. So I pre-wetted the paper and just dropped in a bit of cerulean and cobalt blue there for the sky. and then over to the building. I'm just now laying in this first wash just to cover up the paper, and brush strokes in all sorts of directions just to really so that the wash is not too flat. And I will be going over this later on with darker shadows, but just in case anything does show through as his first wash, just add in a little bit of haphazard brush directions there. There's a bit of warmth on the road that's going to catch the sun and then continue on down to the bottom of the building. Now, as I come down, I will need to be careful to paint around the tops of the boats. I want to keep keep those unpainted. The paper is going to show through because I want them to be bright white. The paper I'm using is not the Saunders High White. You can get, in a few brands, you can get different tones of paper, and this is the sort of normal, slightly creamish paper that may not look like that on the video, but this is not the high white, which for me is just a little bit too bright. Okay, the sea, starting quite light in the background and then down to the shoreline, and as we come down to the shoreline we will need to warm it up a little bit, because with the clear water we can just see a little bit of the sand showing through the water. I should go through the colours I'm using. I'm often asked what colours I use. So from the top I've got neutral tint, then burnt umber, burnt sienna, yellow ochre, viridian green, cobalt green, cerulean blue, we're in the middle there, cerulean blue, cobalt blue, ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, Windsor red, light red, cadmium orange and lemon yellow. Also down the bottom I've got a lavender, bit of a sort of opaquish colour. Brush I'm using is a Raphael Soft Aqua size 6. Not the biggest one they do. I like the handles on these. For me, it suits me with the balance of it, but there are other brands. Princeton do a very similar brush. Not the handle, but the actual brush, the brush head itself. And also a Skoda. There's a few brands out there that do these synthetic mop brushes that work. They actually behave very similar to a natural brush. So I'm painting the hulls of the boats. Doesn't really matter what colour here, because I will be going over this with darker shadows later on when this is dried. But I'm using the edge of the brush. It's got a good edge to it, and very carefully going up to the edge of the boats, want to retain the paper there, let the paper show through. There's a slight slope on the board as well, about 10 degrees. So you'll just see this wash gradually, very carefully, slowly coming down the paper. The very bottom left corner, there's a tiny bit of, I'm not sure if it's a low wall or the edge of the pavement. So I've just, I've just left that bright white there. Add in a little bit of blue into the beach. It's not totally that sort of sandy colour. There's just a tiny bit of coolness in there, different materials. So adding in those various colours, then mop up that bead at the bottom just to make sure it doesn't go back into the painting, causing a little bit of a bloom at the bottom there. That's the initial wash done. And I'm going to speed up the drying process now with a hairdryer. Sometimes I do let it dry naturally. If I've got something else to do, might wander off and then come back to it. Sometimes, you see, with watercolour, particularly if you've got it on a little bit of a slope, it's still moving around a little bit, and it can, if you are patient and leave it and don't speed up the drying process here, it can actually give some nice effects. You come back to it and you think, oh, that look quite nice. Anyway, I'm speeding up the process because it does need to be 100% dry before the next step, which is to add on the darker values, which will suddenly give a little bit of life to the painting, hopefully, and depth. And also the lighter areas will look a lot lighter when there's a little bit of darkness around them to contrast with it. Also, the paper will go flatter. I don't stretch my paper. This is just, I haven't pre-wetted the paper. It is taped down. It does buckle a little bit, which I don't mind personally, but when it dries like this, you can't see it here in this 2D format, but it has flattened quite a lot. Sometimes with the hairdryer, I do need to let it rest a bit because I don't want the paper to be warm. Because if I paint too quickly afterwards, then the paint's going to dry just a little bit too quickly, and I might get some nasty edges. So I do wait a minute or two just for it to cool down, get back to room temperature, if you like. So background hills, you saw me use a little bit of lavender there as well. Tiny bit of burnt sienna. And I'll do this all in one. If there's any little gaps appear, they can be buildings or the rooftops of buildings on the far side of the bay. The brush I'm using here is a Winsor & Newton Squirrel quill mop brush. A pure squirrel mop brush. And it's a size, what size is it? It's a size 4, but it's about 10 millimeters diameter, this brush. And it holds a lot of water. I can get a good edge to it as well. I'm trying to, with these brush marks, these horizontal brush strokes, coming down to the shoreline, hopefully I'll get the impression of some boats in the bay, leaving the shoreline fairly jagged, and that jagged edge could be the tops of boats just this side of the far side of the bay. Lavender, cobalt blue, and just I'm using the edge of the pan there just to wipe off any excess paint, and dropping in a little bit of wet in wet here, dropping in that tiny bit of blue just to add another bit of interest, another dimension to those far hills, but not too much detail. The wall on the far side of the road now on this bend, and leaving a little bit of a light ridge to the top where it's catching the light. Doesn't matter if it just touches the mountains behind, so it's not a continuous light line. Now for the building, I'm going to start off fairly dark. So alizarin crimson, ultramarine blue, neutral tint, bit more neutral tint, burnt sienna, practically everything in this. And this is thicker paint. I'm going to need to be careful with the palm of my hand on the background hills. So I'm just slightly, just holding my hand slightly above the surface of the paper, but quite dark at the top. Just in the top right corner of this building, there's a window. There's some what looks like a very nice apartment with some large windows that open out onto their balcony, and they must have lovely views from up there. But we can just sort of, it must be a dual aspect room up there because we can see through to the other side. So as I come down, I'll just go a little bit warmer with some yellow ochre. Because this is such a large area of the painting, I can't really have it all one value or one colour. I want to try and add in a little bit of colour there. And looking at the photograph, even in the photograph, you can just about see very carefully some cools and some warms with maybe the reflection of the sea or the beach in there. So if you're attempting this yourself, play around with these colours. Now I'll go a tiny bit darker towards the base of this building. Again, I'm using these erratic brush strokes, the direction of the brush, and as I come down to the bottom, using that edge, just create the form of the tops of those boats on the left-hand side. Right, carefully make sure this edge is vertical, and I'm looking to the right or to the left and trying to hopefully see that that line is parallel to the edge of the paper, the edge of the masking tape. And a little bit thicker, darker at the very base of the building. While the top of the building is still damp, add in some darker colour up there, and it's all sort of moving around, and I'll just let it do what it's going to do. Now, slightly lighter for the shadow coming across the road. So I've just got like a weak water mix here. Top right corner out of shot is my water container. So if you see my brush go over there, I'm picking up a little bit more water. Down to the tops of the boats again. Around the top of that boat, this is the retaining wall, the harbour wall. Yeah, I suppose it is a retaining wall. And this is going to be quite dark. It doesn't matter if I leave little bits of the paper unpainted. They can be little objects catching the light. Neutral tint, cobalt blue. Just keep turning the brush so I've got that edge to work with. Now there is an object just to the right of where I am now, like a sort of roundish, I think it's concrete or something in the water. I don't know what it is or what purpose it serves. Maybe it's something, some sort of platform warning boats of the rocky edge of the wall there. But for me, it wasn't doing anything for the composition, so I've just decided to leave it out. And it would be too close to those people. I wanted to include those people, and it would be too close to the tops of the heads of the people. Now for some reflections in the water, and this brush is my favourite brush for doing reflections in the water, trying to get these little gentle wave shapes, holding the brush like this, and some careful horizontal movements. A little bit of shadow behind those waves, so I left a little bit of the paper showing, and a little bit higher up there. Light red, I'll just fill in the little bit of space here at the bottom of the harbour wall. It's coming onto the beach, so there's a bit of shadow coming across the beach. So a slightly darker sandy colour. Far boats, pick up a little bit of blue, check the edge of my brush, not too much water, but with this brush and the way I'm holding it, trying to create now some distant boats, different levels and sizes. I've picked up a synthetic brush and some clear water now. While the building, the shadow on the building is still damp, so it's sort of drying, it's gone past that moist stage, I can just tap in a little bit of water in there. So I pick up a bit of clear water, and I tapped it against my finger for a little bit more of controlled splashing, but it wasn't working, so I decided to be a little bit more aggressive with the splattering and just flicked it across. And then the thing is, just leave it. Just let watercolor do what it's going to do. So in that wall, I've got different colors, different values. I've got that splattering as well. I think that will give something of interest into that large area, and maybe give the feeling of an older building and the paintwork taking a bit of battering, which it must do during the winter. Anyway, left-hand side, foreground now, the boats. Fairly loose and abstract, first of all. I can't really see from the photograph where one boat starts and where it ends, so keep it fairly loose. And also it's on the left-hand side of the painting, it's on the edge of the painting. I don't need to be too detailed or too precise there. But I do need to be fairly careful with these boats. So, and with the detail in the boats, again, keep it fairly loose, fairly abstract, but thinking about the main sort of recesses in the boat between the seat panels, the seats, that bit of shade inside the boat. So this is the shadow on the main boat in the middle, and it's a reddish boat. This one's got a red bit of trim or a line across the top of the boat, and then the bottom of the hull is a dark reddish colour as well. So I'll just let that settle a little bit while I do this next boat, starting again with the bit of shadow inside the boat. Now the tops of the boat are not perfectly smooth. There's lots of little bits and pieces where these sort of pins that stick up where they might put the oars on top, or bits of rigging. It's not a smooth edge, so I don't want to make it too perfect. And there's the inside of the boat, painting around the seats. Now the shadow on the hull of the boat. What I've done at the end of that boat is this rope that's wrapped around the bow of the boat. I'm just creating an impression of that rope, and the darker bits of it I'll embellish. I'll improve on that later on, but that's just the start of it. Now going a tiny bit darker at the base of this boat up to I think it's the stern of the boat. I can use my fingers to lift off a little bit if there's too much paint there or it's a little bit too dark. And now the smaller boat at the back, this darker wash for the hull. Then after this after these I've done the whole boat, so I'll be going in with the darker shadow and going across the beach. Now there's a red boat at the back of the beach, and I just want to introduce a bit of red in that area. So I picked up the Windsor red here. It's quite a bright red, not too much water to cover up that spot where the back of the boat was, and then come down to the top of the next boat. And just drop it in one or two other places. Now, pick up some darker colour now for the shadows. The start of these darker shadows for the bottom of the boats. And generally they're going to be, the actual boats, they're quite dark but the shadows are a little bit lighter, and there's a smooth transition from the bottom of the boat to the shadow, almost to the point where you can't really see the bottom edge of the boat. It's like there's a smooth transition from one to the other. So sticking with this same brush, holding it fairly carefully, and a few lines going up the beach, which could be bits of shadow from rigging and ropes and so on. Bit cooler for this shadow, touch of cobalt. Alizarin crimson, Windsor red, bit of neutral tint, and do the far boat. And follow this gentle curve of the hull up to the back of the boat. So quite dark with that. Now, the top part of the hull is still a little bit damp, so I've got a tiny bit of a soft edge there. They're mixing ever so slightly. And now the shadow going across the beach. Start off fairly dark, and now pick up a bit of water and cooler shadow, cooler, lighter shadow going across. Shadows in the distance are going to be fairly slim, bit wider for the foreground boats, for the nearer boats. There we are, got that bit of a gap at the back of the boat between the bottom and the shadow, just to create that bit of a silhouetted shape of the bottom or the back of that boat. Windsor red, alizarin crimson, bit of ultramarine blue, and then this main boat. Now this one's the wash I did first on this boat is a little bit drier, so I've got a harder edge there between the two. I might just, I will just merge that a little bit when I'm done to connect those two levels together. Right, cooler shadow for this boat going up the beach. Bit of cobalt blue, cool it down. And a rough edge to the shadow, because it's the beach isn't flat, it's got lots of little bumps and troughs, so creating the impression of that surface there, and use my finger just to merge the two together, the top half with the bottom half. Not too much. Now the boat nearest to us, darker blue, so let's have a blue one, two reds and a blue here. Dark ultramarine blue, fairly thick paint this, not too much water, but there's still quite a bit of water on the brush. And up to what I think is the back of the boat. now the shadow. Again, jagged edge to the shadow. We can see just a little bit more of that shadow, just drag a few little bits out. Again, lift off a tiny bit with my finger. Could have done a little bit of controlled splattering in there, or lifted off with a damp brush, or even a bit of paper towel could have equally just lifted off a tiny bit of that. Now these two figures, same brush, and I'll just keep them nice and simple. Just this warmer colour, and down, as I said, just got the tops of these figures, don't need to bother with any legs. So I'll have a bit of shadow coming out. Figure number 2. Down to the top of the boat, which just emphasizes the edge there. Just bits of seaweed, or it could be some shadows from these figures, that the light is sort of almost coming towards us, so I need to be a little bit careful we're not overemphasizing that shadow. Smaller brush now. Start adding in some details. Not too much water on this brush. This is a small synthetic brush. Few bits of darkness to the harbour wall and some of the boats, the waterline of those boats, not too dark because they're in the distance. Neutral tint, ultramarine blue, dark trim across the top of the building, and then these windows, just a few windows. There's actually quite a lot in the photo, but I'll just give a hint of a few of these. So those top windows, first of all, preserve the light of where we can see through the windows to the windows, presumably on the other side, like this dual aspect top floor. And with these window shapes, I need to try and get the edges vertical and parallel to the side of the paper. Now, I'm going to put in a few windows in almost random places in this building. This is it's quite dry now. This building, the shadow. One in the middle here. It's actually got a tiny bit of a balcony in front of it, just a tiny one. Another one there. So that's the first floor. And then down to the ground floor. Doorways, just a couple of doorways, windows. Another doorway here. So I'm just suggesting these windows, a lot in the doorways, not by painting the whole shape. And there's a few lines, vertical lines, horizontal lines, where there's guttering and bits of cabling going around the building. Now, a bit more detail to these boats, and I can get in this thinner line at the top of the hull. It's almost a dry brush stroke, that one. Not too much water on the brush. And then add a bit more detail to the inside, and let's add in another line. This far one does have a couple of lines on the top. I'm going fairly loose with these marks, just some marks to give the impression of the tops of boats and inside of the boats on that far side of the beach, and then down to the middle boat here, and either the boat next to it or inside this one. There's lots of objects inside it. So with this small brush, just create those little marks. Now another line here. Carefully to the end, like that. And I'll attempt here some writing on the boat. Now, it doesn't need to be too precise, and we can't see exactly what the letters and numbers are. It's just creating some sort of name there or numbering on the boat. And now to the blue boat. Line along the hull, and I need to add in a few little bits and pieces inside that boat as well. There's those pins for the oars. May not be the correct term. Somebody in comments, if you know what those pins are called that the oars go over. They're like steel, I guess they're like steel rods that then allows you to more easily or place the oars on top of those. I think it is for the oars. Right, a few more verticals in here. And I'm constantly looking at the photograph for a little bit of inspiration, just to add in little marks here and there where there could be a bit of rope or bits of shingle on the beach. Sneak in another window. Just think it needs to fill in that space there. It was a little bit void, a little bit too empty. And just here and there, another little dab of paint. I mean, on the side of the building, there's lamp posts, and on balconies there's pots and objects. So just suggest those. Right, back down to this boat here, a few little light marks inside it, not too much because that's in the distance. Right, back to the blue one, and create a bit more of the form of the far side of this blue boat, and then the inside. And below the seats is a tiny bit darker, but I don't want to go too dark. Up to the end, it'll just emphasize the end of the boat. Now, how to paint the rope. There's these ropes that are wound around the front of the boats, and I'm just going to use some white gouache here. Just put out a load on the on my palette, and fairly thick, not ultra white, but just now going over this. I could have done some negative painting around the gats, but that would have taken quite long, and it would have forced me to go a bit too tight. So I prefer not overdoing it, but just using a little bit of white paint here, white gouache, to paint in this rope that's wrapped around the front of the boat, and then on this blue one as well, just a few of the strands of the rope. And we'll have a few bits of rope coming out, going up towards the left-hand side, cutting across. Be quite nice to cut across the shadows as well, so we've got a bit of contrast, the light rope against a darker background. Ultramarine blue, bit of burnt umber. Now, where I'm adding in the shadow within the rope, darker bits of rope, I want to make sure that's quite dry, otherwise it's going to mix with the white paint and go a little bit sort of muddy and dirty. So I've got to be careful. Like here, for example, I've just painted this and it's a tiny bit too wet at the moment. So I'll actually use the hairdryer here to make sure it's really dry. As I say, it's just a tiny bit too wet before I can. Got to be careful adding in darker paint on top of white paint in watercolour. It can go horribly wrong, and you just end up with a grey, muddy mix. A little bit of highlights, the figures. Perhaps a little vertical post there, a few more. So this is where the light is catching the top of that rope, and a little bit down the left-hand side, that lighter bit against the shadow will make that hopefully look a little bit better. And then again here, a bit of light across the bow and tops of the rope, just dragging down that brighter white colour from the top, left hand side. And very carefully, could have done that with a rigger brush. That sometimes can give quite a nice line if you've got a very thin rigger brush. I'm using this small round brush, but it's got quite a good edge, so with a bit of practice you can get quite a good straight line. Little bits of rope catching the light down there at the bottom. Burnt umber and some ultramarine blue. Try now and add in a bit of darkness in some of the gaps of the rope, just a tiny bit. As I say, the white paint is or was on quite thick, so I've got to be very, very careful not to damage that layer of white paint. These lines I drag over the edge of the paper just so that there's like here to go over the edge onto the masking tape, and then when we take the masking tape off, I'll have a nice crisp edge to it, but the line doesn't stop too short. A bit more definition to the shoreline with this dry brush mark, just ever so slightly. And that's it, we're done. As I normally do, a little bit of a summary and a self-critique of the painting when I'm done. So Cadaques then, northeast Spain, on the Mediterranean coast, Catalonia or near Girona, and this very pretty whitewashed town, much loved by many artists around the world, particularly watercolour painters. And this little bay on the, where would it be? On the eastern side of the town. I think we're looking across the bay there, looking slightly, I guess, slightly west or south, the light coming almost towards us. And we've got a background, simple background, trying to keep the value quite light, dropped in a bit of colour. We've got a bit of left parts of the paper unpainted, which could be the tops of rooftops, and then down to the shoreline, leaving some jagged edges, which then with some rectangular shapes, I'm giving the impression of a few boats there moored out in the bay. Then very dark building above the beach, and when I painted that, I tried to introduce lots of different colours in there, within reason, not going overboard, but lots of sort of cool colours, a bit of yellow ochre there as well, and then those dark windows. Then the harbour wall is quite dark, coming down to now the tops of the boats, keeping the boats nice and simple, but trying to get their shape correct. All right. So the drawing stage with those boats is very, very important, trying to get those boats absolutely right, because if I don't draw them right, and we're looking down on these boats as well, so it's a bit of a tricky view, this one. Get them right before painting, but the darkness of the harbour coming down to the tops of the boats, creating more of the form, creating a bit of contrast as well between the darkness of the harbour wall and the inside or the tops of the boats. Over on the left-hand side, if I zoom into here, over on the left-hand side, I kept that, zoomed a bit too much there, let it come out a bit. Kept that really loose. It's on the left, it's on the side of the picture. We don't need to be too detailed there, but just suggesting some boat type shapes. And with these lines here that I've done, these sort of vertical lines, just really creating the impression of some objects inside there, oars, rigging, whatever it might be. And the boats, the process there was to paint in the darker side of the hulls, and then the even darker still, the very bottom of the hull, but then adding in or going in straight away with the shadow, so that we can, there's like a smooth transition from, there's a nasty fingerprint there, there's a smooth transition from the bottom of the hull into the shadow going up the beach. Just suggest some numbers. No, we want to try and be loose here, not too tight. Figures as well. Oh, I think they're holding hands, possibly. I don't know whether that was intentional or not, but it looks like they're holding hands. Tiny bit of a shadow or seaweed on the shore there. Bit of a highlight on those figures as well. And then the rope. That I don't often do rope like this. Yes, rigging going across the harbour, but all of this rope here, trying to suggest that my process was to use a bit of white paint, not overdoing it, but then going in a little bit darker in places with the shadow between the darker bits between the rope, and dragging it out across, dragging out that light colour across the darker shadows as well. Yeah, so a background, middle ground interest, and then most of the action on the foreground with those three boats. I ignored the boat in the bottom right corner. That was too, it just didn't bring anything to the composition. It would have diverted the eye down the bottom right corner, I think, and the danger is that we'd have lost the feeling of taking the eye into the middle of the scene. In a way, I think this is the sort of focal point here, that boat, or possibly these people, but they're sort of in that middle, that centre portion of the painting. So yeah, if you're a Patreon member, you might want to have a go at this. Pop in your effort on the community tab. Let's all have a look at your efforts and give each other some encouragement on this. This is not one of the monthly projects. We're doing at the moment, as of 2021, we're doing a virtual around the world trip with different subjects. We've just done the Himalayas. There'll be a new one coming soon. So if you're a member of Patreon, you will have, in this posting, you will have on Patreon the access to the source image my photograph and a high resolution image of this painting. Good luck with that. Catch up with you on the next video.